asking me actually, or interpreting what it is that I say on YouTube about repression as if I'm saying, as if I'm encouraging people to go get angry at other people where they've previously repressed anger. So actually, I was blindsided by this one because I thought, I've been opening my mouth since 2007 pretty prolifically. And when I come out with something, I tend to repeat it a lot so that make sure that I'm clear and I understand that the topics are nuanced and layered and they involve experiential practice. So they're not just, so but I learn that, and one thing I keep learning or relearning is that everybody hears what I'm saying from a slightly different place. And that's okay. Knowing and never assuming that when you're saying something, of course, that people hear it in exactly the way that you intended. Well, I mean, I should know that just because there's no objective reality. But what happens is, how do I forget that? Is that I think, I think the way that I'm saying something is clear, or that something is clear about this work that when, for some people, it might not be. So I was asked, well, someone I think believed that I had been saying you should go out and get angry at people. Here's why that is definitely not what I'm saying. I'm not saying go out and be angry or go out and not be angry. I'm not saying be violent towards others or not be violent. I'm not saying be aggressive towards others or not be aggressive. And it goes all the way down the line with all the repression. So I'm not saying express sadness to people or not express sadness. Ultimately, I'm not. I'm not saying express fear to people or not express fear. Ultimately, that's not what we're doing. So what are we doing? This is inquiry. Period. This is spiritual interior inner work. And why is it important to say that I'm not? Because, I'm not, and none of the facilitators are counselors, therapists, coaches. We are not anywhere in the realm. We're not even close to the realm of the kind of professional or person who gives advice and tells people how to live their life. True. I mean, we make a big deal out of that actually in our community and usually in training. So, as far as I know, in training, that's always made obvious that we're not giving advice, we're not counseling people. So, we're doing interior work, which means, again, with the sense of what or who we are. The inquiries are designed to reveal what we're not, to make that clear, and to reveal what we are, to make that clear in our experience. That's kind of a quote from Nisargadatta, but one of the greatest quotes I've ever read, because that's exactly what we're doing here. Good old Niz, is that it's clear to see what we are not and what we are, and that's a spiritual inquiry. And so we go into these areas of anger because the sense of identity attaches to these things, and when it gets repressed, then there's actually a sense of identity around the repression. Like the programs that are repressing in the mind right now, whether you see them or not, because I've been seeing them with myself and others, many others, the programs there around repression, and there literally are specific words, programs in consciousness. If there's repression that are repressing, they act as part of the mechanism of repression. So those words, even those, there's identification with them, strong identification with them. And you'll see that if you live to repression, it's not going to come without a fight. Just like any story, there's identification. So that's what we're doing. That's all that we're doing. And the embodiment of that realization. So part of seeing what we are not is sort of living in the realization or the recognition of awareness, and then exactly that, embodying that realization by going deeper and further into the somatic experience, because it's the body that keeps the score. It's the body that often stops people on the tracks, or because of what's been stored in the body, the the awakening process is affected by that directly. So when we are, how do I say this? When we are talking about the expression of anger, what we're talking about is that mechanism of repression, which is it's a deep identification. So in order to get at that identification, we use an inquiry that provokes it up. Okay, and the inquiry is roughly saying it's inquiry that says I can feel and express anger. But it's said a certain way and directed a certain way towards the interior experience. The interior experience is what we're talking about. And then through that inquiry, we may or may not become more open to express anger. True, we may or may not. I'll talk about that. But the inquiry is never designed to encourage you. So if you're out there thinking right now that I or any of the facilitators are encouraging a kind of behavior, let me tell you why it's not the case. Because I don't know who said this, many people probably. Just sit with me for a second. Look at the people around you, or yeah, just look at the people around you, close to you. Can you truly, and I mean, can you absolutely know what is best for another person? Now, it may seem like that because we have feelings and thoughts, especially when we're close to people. We have feelings and thoughts about what other people should do. But if you've ever lived, for example, through addiction and been in recovery, you know, for example, that even though someone close to you is drinking, you may not want them to drink anymore because perhaps they're violent or something. They, the way that they drink, they just destroy their lives or their relationships. So you may want that to happen, but you can never know whether when that person wants another drink, is that the drink, first of all, to interfere with that person's autonomy? But even if the person is interfering with your autonomy, even if the person is getting drunk and affecting you in certain ways, you can't know that the next drink won't be the one that wakes them up to something that helps them see that they don't want it, that helps them feel a somatic no, like I don't want to drink. But sometimes they have to have that drink, or sometimes 14 drinks to see this, to experience it, right? So I'm just checking to see if the screen is giving me a strange message. It's a little bit earlier than usual, so I'm surprised at anyone showing up here. But I'm going to be here for a while probably because I have quite a few topics. So something that I learned early on is that when people were when I heard the message that, you know, when you're addicted like I was, that you should stop, it just didn't work. Whenever the suggestion would come from someone else, first of all, it just didn't work because ultimately you've got to ultimately do it for yourself. But the thing is I had to continue using even when I didn't want to, or perhaps when people around me would not have wanted me to. But it was part of the process. So by taking more pills and then suffering those consequences and then taking more, then finally the body and the mind started to say, no, I can't do this anymore. I needed to be able to do that in order to have that discovery. Had someone been interfering with my autonomy there, my apparent autonomy, I don't know if the process would have unfolded as it did. And that's what happens with codependency is that people, I'm going to talk about anger repression in a second. It's totally relevant to that and what it is that we're doing here. So this is cleared up for good here. And there's never a misunderstanding about this. Being that there's no way that for me, I didn't need the codependent people around me, no matter how anxious they were. I didn't need that. And I can see how when there's codependency around you where people are trying to fix or change you, that actually makes it worse because you're not allowed to have your process then. Your autonomy is being interfered with. And so you may not learn the lessons or hit the rock bottom that needs to happen. So in the recovery world, I think I just assume that this is how we think about things. But I realized that in the world outside of recovery, um, that it doesn't really operate like that. And maybe the codependency issue hasn't been brought to light. Because with codependency, we've really seen the nuances of pressure from people in the recovery world. Because with your best intentions, wanting someone to quit easily backfires, and often is what we see. So we kind of learn it in the addiction field that although people have good intentions, their desire to get people to do this or do that often ends up stuff that we have to do deep somatic work on because it's such a driver. It drives the compulsion, it drives the secrecy, hiding, lying, all that. So, taking from the spirit of that, when we develop these inquiries, because just like the 12-step program, these inquiries are a spiritual technology or way of relating. It's a spiritual thing. If you want to categorize it in the way the culture does, this is spiritual. So, inquiry for me has always been, and for the people that have been doing this work, has always been about inner work, not giving advice or coaching. And the same thing for me applies to the expression of anger. Just like we do inquiry on, in this work, we do inquiry on drinking, using drugs, if that's an issue. And what we do is we provoke it up so that we have inquiries that get the mind, for example, it's okay to drink beer. Now, we don't say that as advice. We don't say go drink beer. What we do is we say that to sort of provoke up the craving so that we can witness it from awareness and go into the body and feel what's there and explore and really dismantle the craving. So that's how we provoke it up. And we provoke up it with anger repression. Well, my point is, even though we provoke that up, again, the provoking of it in the inquiry is never meant as advice. Never. So we are silent, almost completely silent on whether you should actually drink or not, because we understand the autonomy thing, the process thing. And we think that inquiry provides great wisdom and insight into those kinds of things so that one can essentially help themselves without us interfering, without finding their own way. With anger expression, it's not much different at all because if you sit and contemplate the question, do I absolutely know what is best for another person or a parent, other person? I can't absolutely know that. So if I'm facilitating someone on anger repression, I cannot know whether they're expressing anger to a father or someone or not expressing it is in their best interest. Because just like the one who's addicted to alcohol or drugs, there's a process there. And one has to be able to live autonomously to learn or unlearn programming around this. And so who's to say that someone expressing anger for the first time in a long time is not exactly what they need in that point in time to come out of something, to lift themselves out of shutdown or deficiency story, that they needed that in that moment. There's no way, if that's the case, then they get to have that experience. If that's what experience they're, I don't need to interfere with that. I also, so I don't need to interfere by saying don't express anger. And I don't need to interfere by saying express anger. And I'm not interfering in any way. Because who's to say that not expressing, maybe not expressing at a certain point is exactly what needs to happen for that person? Because we all have our own experience, don't we? So just to be clear, now that I've said it, I don't want to assume anything, but I would like it that everybody understands that this work is not about, it's not counseling, it's not therapy, we're not giving advice, we're not coaching, no coaching. We're looking from awareness at the nature of reality, the nature of the mind, the body, to discover what is real, what is true, and what is not, and what we are. In the ultimate sense, are we these programs of repression and fear and trauma, deficiency, ego? Is that what we are? Or are these just programs running our life that we can wake up from? And that this is about the waking up. Just so I'm not going to beat this dead horse, but this is about waking up and embodying that awakening ultimately. And even if people don't come to the work for that reason, for whatever reason, it's still not about coaching them. It's about helping them free themselves from something in their conditioning that's creating suffering. Okay, so there we go. Enough of that. Here's an interesting thing is what I'm now working on, which I intend to bring to the forum. This is kind of a new announcement, new to many of the facilitators actually, is in coming out of anger repression in my own life. I've had a chance to feel anger and even rage. And these are emotions that I have felt in the past before the anger repression, but remembering that before the repression work, it would be more like the volcanic eruption. So with repression, in my own experiences, I don't know that I'm doing it. It's an unconscious repression, so that if I have some issue with someone, it would fester. And frankly, living in awareness, the festering was not anything that I could barely feel it if it was there at all. It's really unconscious. It's just like an unconscious festering around something. So it might cause, for me, it causes sometimes at the very most, like some stress or disturbance in the body, which would often just kind of faintly fade away and get tucked away. The mechanism is clever. It just sort of gets tucked away, and it seems like there is no problem. I don't until, but slowly it's festering, and then as circumstances in life build upon an issue, like because I'm not speaking up in the festering, that's what it was. So somebody's saying something or doing something, and for whatever reason, I don't say anything, but there's a viewpoint around it there. It's just not saying something. And so then the circumstances continue, and here comes the volcanic eruption because there was no spontaneous expression of what felt natural to say earlier. And so the anger would be like, ah, like, first of all, it would be disproportionate to this current situation when it would come out. And it rarely would come out. That's the other thing. And there was just a lot with it. Or when it would come out. No wonder there was repression of it. And often the circumstances that I was getting angry at, like finally getting overtly angry at, were often, like I said, they weren't the real issue. The real issue was, quite frankly, went back to not being able to speak. There was almost like getting angry at not being able to get angry, or but sometimes and many times not. It was just not being able to get angry at someone for whatever reason, and then suddenly, I'm pissed. So through the anger repression work, anger became more accessible. Now, what that means is much more conscious. So it felt like it literally got released from the chronic pain and something, so much more access to it, which was made all the difference. If you ever think that what I'm thinking about was a bad experience, like even though there was anger, it was absolutely liberating, empowering, life changing, especially to the body. Yeah, I'll go ahead and say that. Life changing. That feels true. Um, so the thing is I certainly had access, I think, to some of the more vulnerable emotions because they were allowed within the personality structure. So, but here's the catch. So when I say vulnerable, I mean shame, fear, guilt. Even if you want to get into areas that are kind of like deficiency stories, if there was powerlessness, those felt pretty okay to share, actually, at least with close friends and people around me. Not as a teacher, of course. And that's the lack of transparency that was happening for me and that I'm correcting now by being more transparent. So, what was interesting to find out is when the anger came out of repression, The anger allowed me more access, even more access to any vulnerable emotions under it that went along with it. And that's something that I couldn't experience until the anger was accessible. Because once I felt anger, my husband says it really is just a surface emotion. I don't know, that's a fine word to say it's surface, but what I see is that it simply has other layers to it. So at the top layer, anger, if it's accessible, but under that you're going to see or feel fear, or I have feel hurt, fear, hurt, maybe shame or guilt. And so unpacking that, so I'm developing new inquiries that unpack the anger response because those of us coming out of repression now, we're having to we get to is how it is. Like we're fortunate that we have access to anger now. But as it comes up, it can be very powerful, especially if you've done really skillful repression work. It can be powerful at first, but quite frankly, inquiry deconstructs it rather well so that it's fully allowed if done skillfully. And so what I'm working on now is quite fascinating. It's an inquiry on the layers of emotion. So when anger is on the surface, it starts to question the root of the anger first, so that the anger is allowed as the surface level emotion, as Chester says. And then it unpacks the other layered emotions one by one through the Killaby inquiries, getting to the most vulnerable emotion, and then allowing all those along the way. And then if you're having a dispute with someone where you can speak openly, learning how to speak from each one of those emotions as you do inquiry on that layer. So it just nicely unpacks the emotional layering under anger. And this just came up for me naturally as the last time that I got angry was a while back. I could feel that in a conversation with Chester, and he was feeling anger. So we were open to what it is that it's really ultimately trying to show us. And I pulled away, and he left for a second to go to the store. And I pulled away and then thought, okay, so this is good. This anger is here because it's about expressing really. So it helped me express, but I just unpacked that just sitting on the couch, like the layers of it, you can feel it, but it's hard to access the layers of vulnerability when you're still riding the anger. So what I noticed is I don't want to bypass the anger or repress it as that surface or overt layer. But there's some really skillful inquiry that you can do right with that layer that honors and acknowledges the anger, but also diffuses its power because it's taking away the identification as you're feeling it and allowing it. And then moving to those other vulnerable emotions, more vulnerable emotions, and then also again speaking from each layer. So this is exciting, really, guys. Like this feels very powerful. So I cannot wait to just show it to you. But I'm not going to do it publicly because anytime we're doing like deep emotional work, there's always the chance that again, something I need to be able to, for a while, is just show it to you and see how it shows up in your body and your life so that, working together. And then once you get because these are a specific set of tools. Let me say it that way. It is these tools that brought up the anger repression. It's these tools that are now unpacking these layers and going deeper. So it's these tools that I want to show you. And it's important to know these tools to be able to access it in this way because it's these tools that do it. So, more interaction at this new site where I can just unpack it and show it to you, and we're going to have a lot of fun with this. Trust me, this is going to be fun. I don't know if fun is the right word, but certainly liberating and freeing and embodying. I get a sense of when a tool is created I used to write songs, and you get a sense of when some song is really special, like it touches people, you know. Unfortunately, I never made it big or anything, so I don't know how many people were touched. um, but creating inquiry is similar because it's like that there's something there when something gets created. It's very powerful, and for me, it's just like I just want to share it with people. That's what I want to do. Okay. So we have some stuff here. Some stuff. Let's see what stuff we have today. Anybody have any comments, questions, complaints, grievances, inspirations, anecdotes? Trust me, I really want to show you the unpacking of those layers of emotion, but I'm not going to. For those of you doing sessions with me, bring it up in session. For those of you in training with me, bring it up. I'll try to bring it up. Because normally, when a tool like this is developed and it's powerful, I want to encourage the people that I'm already working with to use it, especially those coming out of repression. Okay, so I saw a YouTube comment because I've been sharing part of the transparency thing is owning up to the fact that when we put out deep somatic work like this, these tools, there's always some danger or risk. And I shared yesterday that if and when we become overwhelmed by using any tool, emotionally overwhelmed in some way, there can be thoughts of depression or suicide that come in. And there's always the chance of that with any modality. I mean, it happens with meditation. For example, overwhelm happens. So, if done responsibly and skillfully, because you remember the tools have built into them these little mechanisms that reduce or eliminate, at least reduce, the potential for overwhelm. They were just built right into every tool. But if you don't use the tools, don't know them, or don't know how to use them correctly, then the re traumatization thing doesn't get taken care of. So the tools don't work if you don't use them, or don't use them the way that we have designed them, because they're designed to dismantle gently, humanely, and where the potential of overwhelm is low, actually. But when people learn that on their own, they may not have that skill level yet. So that's the issue. Either the recognition of presence isn't enough for them to sort of hold everything, and or the skill level isn't there. So this is again another reason why I'm moving to a private forum. So just in case you don't know, if you like these videos at all, be ready, because they're essentially going to go away. The ones that are out there will stay, and I will come onto YouTube now and again, but I envision a lot less here on YouTube because I'm more interested in engaging with people in real time, interacting with them, and experiential work. That's what I like. The stuff that I talk about is like context. I'm talking about the work, and that's important too, because as Ken Wilber said, every spiritual experiential practice has a conceptual framework, has a context, and the context is critical. Every teaching has a context, even if the context is you are awareness and everything else is illusion and there's no self. That's a context. Okay. Oh, and here's another thing. Someone brought up embodiment, and they said, okay, I've been listening to you, Scott. I'm paraphrasing. I've been listening to you. For the first time, I'm becoming open to what embodiment is referring to. And then they illuminated why they had issues with the word before. And I'd never heard it said like this. But I totally understand it now, how some people see it. Embodied, the word embodied, to them sounded like I'm coming back to identify as being in a body. And so, therefore, when they heard embodiment, it sounded like some sort of regression, like recognizing the transcendent, that which is not embodied in any way, the vast, open, boundaryless this. And so, when they heard the word embodiment, they thought it's this experience being trying to encapsulate it into a body and hold it there, identify as a body. And that is not what it is at all. And these kind of questions help me clarify it. It's not that at all. Nothing close, really. At this stage of the game where the embodiment is happening, the body identification itself is either gone, or how do I say this, or whatever body identification is left tends to be stored in the contractions. So I think there's a lot of people who essentially have seen through the self, but then they have these sensations. And so essentially they see that there's no thought that is what they are. Every feeling comes and goes. That's not me. I mean, all words and pictures come and go. And then the recognition of the awareness that remains. But then they have like this sensation that's persistent, or sensations, contraction. And in those contractions, there can be identification, old programs, traumas, right? We've seen that before, talked about it. So the embodiment actually is the opposite in a way of what the person is saying. So the notion is that in the non-dual realization, there's still like identification at this deeper level in the somatic, like old stories of I'm not safe, dad, I can't express anger, I'm not good enough, held somatically. So the embodiment is seeing through those identifications, which is an even greater recognition, first of all, of the non-dual. Because as I was saying, then when awareness is embodied, when there aren't any contractions with these identifications, the embodiment feels deep and full, reverberating, but not contained in the body. It's even more depth of openness, and certainly less identification with the body. But the thing is then for me, it's if you take it deep enough, once you see through all that, you're starting to see through all that, you then welcome in conventional reality. There's then not a problem, for example, with the expression here of an individual. That's completely included in it. So the embodiment is not coming back into a body and identifying with it. It's further seeing the identifications within the body for a deepening or embodiment of that awareness. It's the awareness or the emptiness, however you want to say it, depends on your lineage, that goes all the way down and through the body. And so, again, the experience is deep, full, open, reverberating. There's a sense of empowerment with it, especially if you come out of repression. That's what we're talking about. And in doing that, though, strangely, you have to include your entire human experience. So, in some ways, when you embody and include your entire human experience, you're not then as avoidant. There's something that the embodiment brings. The avoidance in relationship or of whatever was because of something that was still there in the body. So it comes back to include everything rather than avoid everything, embodying and encompassing everything that was divided off from you, whatever that is, whatever was unresolved and unlooked at and avoided gets included. So sometimes embodiment feels like someone is really more engaged in life, like not transcendent, avoidant, moving away from, like that, which is the awakening, the ascension. Like, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not anything, I'm not anywhere. Um, but there is a sense with the embodiment that because you're not avoiding life, the relative objects or the appearances, you're not in avoidance anymore. There's something about being more fully here in relationship and more fully here in life than you could have experienced in the I'm awareness, just pure awareness, but not embodied thing. Very hard to put words to this. Let's also talk about when you become increasingly liberated from these identifications. Again, you can welcome in, because it never left, conventional reality. Some people call, at that point, there's a constructed self. So it's not real, it's illusory. It's been seen that there is no inherent self there. But then, therefore, the designation of self isn't a problem for conventional reasons. This is why I don't get on YouTube and say I am pure awareness or I am God. Although anyone could say that in a non-dual realization, not as an ego thing, but as a recognition. I am that. That's what you are. But I don't get on here and say that because the conventional designation of Scott is not a problem, nor is the conventional designation of cup. But you can see the emptiness of everything, so then there's not a problem with the things as illusory as they are, empty as they are. My cup is full, though. I think the Nisargadatta touched on that when he said the wisdom is seeing that I'm nothing, love is seeing that I'm everything. Without using the word embodiment, it felt like that's a very embodied way of seeing things. Because when I'm nothing, it's the transcendent. I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this. It's almost like it's almost like floating up to heaven or something, but just the emptiness of it. But then it's like coming back down and everything gets included. Everything that you were trying to move away from gets included, but then there's no suffering in it anymore. The world. And I can just hear someone say, there's plenty of suffering in the world. I'm saying suffering for you. Suffering begins to die away as we meet things. Embody the realization. Conventional designation. Because as you're seeing going through this process, you, again, not only have you seen that there's no self, but then now the body, you're starting to see the identifications in the body. Excuse me, guys. I thought I took care of that issue. The conventional designation. So one of my teachers, Get Good, said that it's like if you really see through, if you see the emptiness of all things, then you can see that it was always illusory. That was always that way. You're just recognizing it. Now, can you just come back and not dismiss relative reality now that it's not creating suffering in the same way? Which means, okay, here's Scott, here's a cup, here's a university, movie theater, government, all conventional designations. Mother, that's fine. Father, but you don't believe it in the same way, is one way of saying it. The conventional designation then is you just refer to these objects conventionally. Relative reality is fine. It's illusory. It's fine. The reason I'm really spending time on that is because if you just, as a context, if you can see it that way, that the only reason we're trying to transcend the relative reality is because it creates such suffering. So as we deal with our suffering, including the embodiment of it, of the suffering and of seeing through it in the body, then the reality, conventional reality, is not the source of suffering in the same way. So there'd be no way or no reason to turn away from what is not causing suffering. And as you embody whatever is still causing suffering, that's where the embodiment happens. So this is why I keep saying use relationship as a tool, because as you recognize awareness, whatever hasn't been seen will probably show up in your relationship to food or people or the government or politics or some other relationship will be there to help us. Is any of this making sense? How could it? How could this? This is paradoxical. This is not for the rational mind, but am I putting words to it enough that make it clear as to what I'm pointing to? Okay, here's a good one. I might do this last. There's two questions that are kind of unique. One is, tell me about Chester, or your relationship with Chester. Well, I'll say this. As I said before, I know that I picked someone that if I have any buttons, he can push them, whereas nobody from my past was able to because of the way that he shows up. And first of all, I love Chester. Love Chester. If you've never felt what it's like to be with the one who's right for you. That doesn't mean I know we're going to stay together because I don't know the future. But if you've never had that feeling that this is right, that's what it's like. We have our disputes, but there is an amazing amount of love. It sometimes renders me speechless, actually. I don't know what to say about it. Just all heart. In some ways, our relationship is really all heart, punctuated by moments of dispute. But I have welcomed those because that's how I came out of repression, anger. So he's a teacher in that way. Chester grew up completely able to express anger and sees it as a healthy emotion that's needed sometimes. He's got his own issues with that he's working on, but that helped me. He taught me that my conditioning and my upbringing was a certain way around certain emotions. And although he didn't develop the repression work, he was a big inspiration for it because as a mirror, he could show me what it is that wasn't yet accessible for me, still unconscious in the body. So if you can get a Chester, you should do that. Your own Chester, who will help you find those areas that are hidden, those blind spots for the deeper embodiment. Feel blessed, truly blessed to have found him. Okay, and then here's a fun one. So someone's asking, you're good, Scott, at eliminating the pitfalls and the darker aspects of awakening. What are the good aspects of it? Wow, is that the picture that I paint? Okay, let me clarify that. You guys are going through your own process. So I don't even have to speak for you in terms of whatever shows up on the path. So you can speak for yourselves. But the question was directed towards me, so I'll answer it. Never, if I had the choice as an individual, a parent individual, if I had the choice to go back to any earlier time in my life, whether there was a strong ego consciousness there or not, it would never, if someone granted me that wish, it would never do that, even if it gave me more years on the earth. The realization is so peaceful and liberating that it's really becomes challenging or even not even necessary to even try to explain that to people around me. Energetically, it's like my body produces pleasant feelings, bliss, tingling, love. Like those are things that I feel quite often. Compassion, peace, but not the peace that excludes anger, the peace that allows it all. My direct experience is like right now, right here, is no separation. I couldn't even find it if I tried. I can feel sensations. So I touch this computer, I can feel sensation. But when the mind is quiet, it's not saying computer. It's not saying anything about what's being touched or if something's being touched. There's just a sensation. The non dual becomes such the new normal that it's not a big deal, actually. In the beginning, I always wondered why Adya said that it might start with all these big realizations and experiences, but it sort of winds up with just a simple presence, love, simple presence or love. And seeing that in my own life, it's The way that I talk about it is when you've lived in darkness or unconsciousness for your whole life, when you have a sudden experience, it's like the lights come on in a dark room. So imagine being in a dark room and you can't see anything, and it's scary and, yeah, just dark. And the lights come on suddenly. So for me, there were a couple of very sudden realizations. It isn't that way for everyone. But when you have a sudden realization, it's like the lights come on, the light comes on. And so that's a big deal at first because the mind is then comparing it because it's such a drastic change on one level. It's comparing it to what it was like. And so it's like, at first, that's a big deal. But then it just becomes the new normal. So you don't have any other point of reference after that. It's like you can't go back. And it stops being a huge deal because it's the new normal. So what was making it a big deal is the mind, if that happened at all, or the spiritual books, because everything falls away, even those shifts, those moments, even the mind that makes it into a big deal, all of that falls away, and then in the falling awake, there is like just simple presence, just simple love, and that's it. Impossible to explain the depth of peace. Impossible. There's no single thought that anyone that could have that would encapsulate that or certainly bring about that peace because it's not coming from thought. It passes all understanding. The understanding would come from thought. I am not talking about a peace that represses anger. It is the peace that passes understanding and encompasses all. So if it's a peace that excludes anger, it doesn't encompass all. It can be even more deeply peaceful. I'm not trying to assign an attribute to awareness. I'm telling you about my experience. Because everything that comes through awareness is different. So it's not the state of being at peace. That comes and goes. When I've been angry at Chester, that state is not there, but the knowing still is. The opening through which something is happening, and when that anger is allowed through that openness, the body is clearer. It's not being repressed or held back or resisted. So that even deepens the realization as that's allowed. Because you're not holding on to that anymore. So it's the peace that passes all understanding and encompasses all, including anger and including aggression. And that is not advice to go be aggressive towards people. I'm not giving advice. Aggression. Part of my repression work was to lift aggression. There was a story that says you can't be aggressive because that's part of the anger repression. Can't show aggression. The insight that I had doing that was that animals, and in our history, evolutionarily speaking, aggression was very helpful, as was anger and fear for survival. So it's a natural primary emotion. And, we live in comfortable, in some of us, privileged places now where we don't have to fight for food, water, and shelter. But I think we've seen through COVID and the civil unrest and the other things that we live in a fairly fragile world. And so there may come a time when survival becomes even more important. And that's where fear and aggression will, in some cases, help people survive, protecting their house, their family, whatever. I'm not trying to scare you, just talk about this for a second. So before we get so spiritual that we don't have aggression online, remember that it serves a purpose in life. It has, for us to survive. So even if you're never aggressive towards another person, are you blocked around that? Because I think that when something is so much a part of our experience, it's a natural arising, it's even helped us survive, then blocking that would definitely have an effect on our bodies, of course, and our minds. Speculation, I suppose, but there it is. Let's see what you guys are saying today. All right. Unpacking the layers. Yes, Nick. Um, yeah, they're like grief, accessed in a certain order because when I'm angry, that's all, that phrase, I see red. It's like when you're really angry and you're not holding it back, like you're not repressing it. Because if you're repressing it, it might not even feel like the top layer. The top layer might feel like hurt or, like not having access to, you're shut down because you can't express anger. But if the anger is accessible, whether you're expressing it or not, that takes up attention in those moments, right? So have you ever been really angry, Nick, and then you can't just sit down and go, "Oh, I'm really feeling fear," and well, you may have done that because you're into this kind of thing, but when we're angry, we're angry. So these inquiries help us to not only allow this anger when it's up, but deconstruct the programs that are going along with it so that it's more fully allowed and not identified with, and then it's just moving to the other layers. Um, I really want to show it to you guys, and I will. I'll tell you what, here's what we'll do. Go to Scott Funkhauser this morning. It's 8:14, so I've got some time. I'll go show it to you. Go to this account on Facebook. You have 5 minutes to do it. I'm gonna start at 8:20 Central Time, and I have 40 minutes to talk about this. So this account here, Scott Funkhauser, that's my birth name. There's a picture of me in Chester on a beach, the shadows, and then there's my Chihuahua, Oliver. So Funkhauser, Funk House with an R. If you can get there within 5 minutes and request to be a friend, I'll show you this inquiry around the layers of emotion. And I may or may not keep the video up. So I'll just do the video and whoever's there can learn it. I may delete it because I want to move all this to the new place. But I'm willing for those when Nick said he wanted to know, I don't want to keep that from anybody who might benefit. So let's go play. You ready to play? Go there. You have 5 minutes. So it's 8:15 Central Time. Right now, at 8:20 Central Time, I'll start. I don't even have a name for this inquiry. That's how new it is. So the nameless inquiry around unpacking emotions, starting with anger at the top. I'm going to do that with you. And I'll stay around for a while just to answer questions about it. So head there. And I'm just going to invite others there that I know would want to come, reach out to them. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I'm not actually going to post this on Facebook. I'm just going to do this for you guys that are here. There's only 8 of you, but I don't mind getting you started on that. So, in order for me to engage with you on it, please have working knowledge of reverse inquiry, utility inquiry, and mining. Because if I unpack this for you without those tools, it's not going to work the same way at all. Because it's these tools that allow me to create this. It's the tools. Okay, I'll get you. I'll get your friend request. Anybody who sends a friend request between now and 8:20 Central Time will get in. Okay, so Nick, hold your questions about this, and then we'll get to it. everybody. I'll see you in just a few minutes at that account.